The rain wasn't just falling, it was pounding, soaking everything in sight like the sky had run out of patience. Eleanor pulled the hoodie tighter around her son's head, but it barely helped. His thin sweatshirt was already clinging to his small frame, and her own shoes squished with every step as they stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by soggy boxes, 2 trash bags, and a stuffed dinosaur with one missing eye. Leo didn't say much. He just stared at the apartment door that had been slammed behind them 15 minutes ago, where his bedroom used to be, where his drawings still hung on the wall. At least they had, until the landlord threw them out with everything else. Elena's fingers trembled, partly from the cold, mostly from the shame. She didn't cry, not yet. She told herself she had to be strong. For him, that's what mums do, right? Just down the road, a dented pickup truck rolled to a slow stop. The driver was a man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, buzz-cut, with a military-grade stare and a tired jawline that looked like it had seen too many years of silence. But it wasn't him who noticed first. It was the dog. A golden-brown German shepherd suddenly stood up in the passenger seat, ears high, tail stiff, letting out a low, steady whine. Not a bark, not a growl, just a sound filled with urgency. "Ranger?" the man asked, confused. "What is it, boy?" The dog pawed at the door, eyes fixed on the woman and child standing in the rain. The man looked, then really looked. No umbrella, no car nearby, just 2 figures soaked through, clutching each other like the world had forgotten them. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. Then he pulled over. Eleanor didn't move as the man approached. She didn't trust strangers, not anymore. But Leo, still holding his dinosaur, looked up at the dog who had just leapt down from the truck. The dog didn't bark, he didn't sniff. He walked slowly, respectfully, until he was in front of Leo. And then he did something strange. He sat down. Then gently, slowly, he rested his chin on the boy's knee. Mark Hensley had seen this gesture once before, years ago, in a different country, under fire with a different man giving the command. A name came back to him like a whisper from the past. David Albright. And suddenly, Mark felt the ground beneath his feet wasn't wet because of the rain, but because something far deeper had been stirred. Eleanor didn't know what to make of it. The dog was still there, head resting gently on Leo's knee, like he belonged to them somehow, like he knew something she didn't. Leo wasn't afraid. In fact, it was the calmest she'd seen him all day. His little hand reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched the dog's ear. No flinch, no bark, just silence. The man stepped forward, careful not to startle either of them. "His name's Ranger," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "He doesn't do that with anyone, ever." Eleanor looked up at him then, the first time she really looked. His boots were muddy, his jeans frayed at the knees, army jacket, short haircut, but his eyes, that was what caught her. Not cold, not pitying, just present. Like he knew what it was to be out in the rain with nowhere to go. "Are you two okay?" he asked, though it was clear they weren't. Elena hesitated, the truth was heavy on her tongue. "We'll be fine," she lied. The man nodded once, as if he heard the truth anyway. "Look, I'm Mark. I live about 10 minutes up the road. Got a cabin, dry, warm, and a coffee pot that actually works." He looked down at Leo. "You like hot cocoa, kid?" Leo glanced at his mum. She said nothing, but her eyes were glassy, torn. Mark knelt beside them. "I'm not trying to scare you. I get it. No one's handing out trust for free these days. But I promise you this." He looked at Ranger. "That dog? He's the best judge of character I've ever met, and he just chose you." Eleanor didn't speak, she didn't move. But then Leo tugged her sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "he smells like bacon." It wasn't much, but it was enough to break whatever wall she'd built. She laughed, a small, cracked sound that surprised even her. "Okay," she said, her voice hoarse, "just for tonight." Mark helped them into the truck, handing Leo a worn towel and turning the heater up full blast. Ranger hopped into the back seat without needing to be told, curling up beside the boy like he'd done it 100 times before. As they drove through the winding back roads, silence filled the cab, but it wasn't the heavy kind. It was soft, breathing, a kind of quiet that said, "You're safe for now." Mark didn't ask questions, not yet, he just drove. But in the corner of his mind, the memory of that gentle gesture, the resting chin, kept circling back. Because years ago, in a combat zone far from here, Ranger had only ever done that for one person, Sergeant David Albright. And if that was true, then this woman, this child, they weren't strangers at all. They were family. The rain had softened into a steady mist by the time they pulled up to the cabin. It wasn't fancy, just a small, one-story place tucked behind a line of pine trees, with a wrap-around porch and a swing that creaked when the wind blew. But the windows were glowing, and smoke curled from the chimney. Warmth lived here. Mark stepped out first and opened the door for them. "Careful on the steps, they get slick when it rains," he said. Elena followed slowly, her arms wrapped around her body. Leo held Ranger's leash, not because he needed to, but because Ranger let him. It was the kind of trust that didn't need words. Inside, the cabin smelled like old wood, fresh coffee, and something faintly like cinnamon. There was a couch with worn cushions, a fireplace already crackling, and a kitchen where a kettle was just beginning to hiss. "You can dry off by the fire," Mark said, pointing toward a blanket on the couch. "I'll grab some dry clothes." Eleanor hesitated. "You really don't have to—" "I know," he interrupted gently, "but I want to." She didn't argue. As she helped Leo out of his wet socks, she looked around and noticed the framed photo above the mantel. It was old and slightly tilted. Two men in uniform, arms slung over each other's shoulders, dirt on their faces and smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Mark noticed her looking. "That's David," he said. "We were in the same unit, Iraq 2007. Her breath caught. "David Albright?" she asked. He nodded. "You knew him?" She swallowed hard. "He was my husband." Silence. Not awkward, not heavy. Just a moment stretching wide as both of them tried to process what had just been said out loud. Mark sat down slowly on the opposite couch, his hands folded together. "I thought he never made it back," he said quietly. "I sent Ranger to a buddy in the States when David was killed. But then my buddy moved, and Ranger got lost in the shuffle. I thought he was gone." She looked over at Ranger, now curled up at Leo's feet, eyes half closed, tail thumping every now and then like he was dreaming. "He wasn't lost," Elena whispered. "He just found his way back." Mark looked at her for a long moment. "So did you." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away before Leo could see. Mark didn't push. He stood, grabbed 2 mugs, and poured hot cocoa into one, coffee into the other. He handed her the cocoa. "You don't have to tell me anything, not unless you want to." But Elena was already staring at the fire, her lips parted. And for the first time in a long time, the story started to come out. Not the whole thing, not yet, but enough to crack the dam. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the rain had slowed to a whisper, like even the storm was listening now. Eleanor stared into the flames, holding the mug with both hands. She hadn't touched the cocoa yet. It was more about the warmth than the taste. Her fingers needed something to hold, something steady. Mark didn't say a word. He just sat nearby, sipping his coffee, letting the silence do its job. Finally, Elena spoke. "After David died, everything moved fast," she said, her voice low and flat, like she'd told this story in her head 100 times but never out loud. "The army called. They sent me his things, the flag, the letter, the life insurance paperwork." She paused, swallowed. "David's cousin Richard showed up the next day, said he was there to help, said David trusted him." Mark didn't flinch, but his eyes hardened just slightly. He'd heard that line before, someone showing up right after the funeral, pretending to care. He helped with the funeral arrangements, took over the bills, handled calls I couldn't even bear to answer. I was in pieces, numb, grieving. And I had Leo, he was barely 4 then, still asking when Daddy was coming home. Her hands tightened around the mug. "One day, Richard brought me a stack of papers to sign. Said it was for transferring the life insurance to a trust, to make sure Leo was taken care of. I didn't read them, I just signed." Mark didn't interrupt, he knew better. "Turns out I signed away everything, the life insurance, the savings, even the deed to the small house David and I bought before he deployed." She blinked fast, but the tears were spilling now, quiet and unchecked. "When I realised it, I tried to fight it, but I had nothing. No money, no lawyer, no family who could help. And Richard, he was slick, smiled in court, had documents, witnesses. I looked like a bitter widow trying to stir up drama." Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Why didn't you call someone? Call me? Call the unit?" Her voice cracked. "I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be seen as some widow trying to cash in. I was ashamed." There it was, the word that sat in her chest for years. Ashamed. Mark let out a slow breath, more like a sigh than anything else. "Elena, shame is what people like Richard count on. It keeps good people quiet." She didn't answer, but Leo did, his small voice drifting over from the rug where he was now curled up next to Ranger. "Mum?" "Yeah, baby? Is this dog really Daddy's?" She smiled through tears. Yeah, he was Daddy's friend. Leo nodded and laid his head on Ranger's side. He feels safe? Mark looked at them, at the boy, the mother, the dog, and something settled deep in his chest. A promise maybe, or a mission, one that hadn't ended with David's death after all. He stood slowly and grabbed his phone from the kitchen counter. You said Richard still has the paperwork, he asked. Eleanor looked up. I think I have the originals somewhere. I kept them, even after everything, just didn't know what to do with them. Mark's jaw set. Good, because I know someone who might. He scrolled through his contacts and tapped a name. Sarah Jenkins, veteran, JAG officer turned lawyer, tougher than nails, and she hated injustice more than anyone he knew. It was time someone fought for David's family, for real this time. Mark didn't usually make calls after 10. Most people, especially the ones dealing with heavy stuff, were done for the night by then. But Sarah Jenkins wasn't most people. The phone rang twice. Mark, she answered, no greeting, just her voice, steady, sharp, awake. You okay? Yeah, he said, I got something for you. A case, maybe. A pause, then a sigh. You're not calling this late for maybe. Mark turned, watching Leo sleeping next to Ranger on the couch, one hand still tucked into the dog's fur. Elena sat in the armchair, eyes heavy, but listening. It's about David Albright's widow, Elena. She and their kid just got evicted. Turns out David's cousin stole everything from them, insurance payout, house savings, the works. Another pause. You're sure? I am now. She's got the original paperwork tucked away somewhere. Just needs someone to make sense of it. I'll do it, Sarah said without missing a beat. But tell her this won't be quick or easy. The courts don't move on emotion. I'll need proof and a hell of a paper trail. We'll find it, Mark said. She sighed again, this time softer. You're still trying to fix things for the ones who didn't make it back. He looked out the window, where the porch light reflected off the misty trees. Some debts don't go away, Sarah. I'll be there in this morning, she said, and hung up. Mark turned back to Elena, who had quietly stood and wrapped a blanket over Leo. She's in, he said. But she'll need every piece of documentation you've got. Birth certificates, insurance papers, anything with signatures or stamps. Elena gave a small nod. They're in storage. I didn't want to carry them around while couch hopping, so I left a box at my friend's garage. But it's been months. It might be damaged by now. We'll check first thing, Mark promised. And if it's there, we'll make it work. She gave a tired smile, one of those half-hearted ones that meant more than it looked. Why are you doing all this, Mark? He thought about that for a second. I told David I'd keep an eye out for his family if anything ever happened. I figured he meant a phone call now and then, maybe a Christmas card. I didn't know it would mean finding his dog in the rain and chasing down stolen documents in the middle of the night. A soft laugh slipped out of her, short, surprised. Well, he always did make promises feel bigger than they were. Mark smiled too. Yeah, he did. For a moment, they just stood there, listening to the fire crackle and Ranger's soft breathing. Outside, the rain had stopped. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But something had shifted. The kind of shift that happens when someone finally says, enough. The next morning, the air was crisp and damp, with that sharp post-rain smell of wet earth and pine. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat of Mark's truck, holding a cup of lukewarm gas station coffee. She hadn't said much since they left the cabin. Neither had Mark. But it wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind you fall into when two people are moving through something big, and both know it. Leo was in the back seat with Ranger, who had his head resting across the boy's lap. Every now and then, Leo would gently stroke the dog's ears, like it helped keep him calm too. The truck turned into a narrow gravel driveway that led to a detached garage behind an old blue house. Eleanor exhaled slowly. I haven't been here in months, she said. I don't even know what's left. Mark parked and gave her a small nod. Let's find out. Inside the garage, the smell of dust and oil hit them right away. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, some sagging, others half collapsed. Eleanor scanned the mess and sighed. It should be a grey one, she said. Plastic, with a cracked lid. I put everything important in there before I lost the apartment. Mark rolled up his sleeves. We'll go box by box. Ranger sniffed at the corner, then paced a slow circle before settling near a pile in the back. Eleanor moved quietly, lifting the corner of one box, peeking in, shaking her head. Old clothes, broken dishes. Mark opened another. Toys, some pictures maybe. A soft bark cut through the space. They both turned. Ranger stood stiff, tail still, ears forward. He let out another low bark, not loud, not frantic, just certain. Mark stepped toward him, crouching near the box Ranger was nudging with his nose. It was grey, plastic, cracked at the lid. "You sure, bud?" he asked, already lifting the top. Inside, a stack of folders lay wrapped in a dry towel, though the edges were stained with water damage. Underneath, a sealed envelope marked with David's handwriting, "For Elena, if anything happens." Eleanor gasped, covering her mouth. Her knees buckled and she sank down beside the box. "I thought I lost this," she whispered. Mark gently pulled out the towel, unwrapping the contents on a nearby workbench. Papers, insurance documents, a deed, a copy of David's will, even a letter from the army confirming his benefits. Eleanor reached for the envelope, her hands trembling. She didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she looked at Mark. "I can't believe you found it." He looked at Ranger. He found it. They were quiet again, this time with something new hanging between them. Hope. Not the loud movie kind. Not the kind that comes with big speeches and music swelling in the background. Just the quiet kind. The kind that shows up in a damp box in a dusty garage right when you're about to give up. The kind that smells like old paper and wet fur. Mark grabbed his phone and took a picture of everything, just in case. Then he texted Sarah. "Found the originals. All of it. Ranger's the real MVP. Be ready." Her response came back seconds later. "Let's go get what's hers." Elena looked at Leo, still sitting in the truck, now drawing shapes into the fogged-up window. "We might actually have a shot now," she said softly. Mark nodded. "You more than have a shot." And in the back of the truck, Ranger wagged his tail, just once, like he knew his mission wasn't over, but it was finally going somewhere. The courthouse was smaller than Elena expected, nothing like the cold marble buildings from the movies. This one had faded beige walls, buzzing overhead lights, and chairs that creaked when you sat too fast. But the weight in her chest didn't come from the building, it came from the man sitting across the hallway. Richard. He looked different now, expensive haircut, tailored suit, a leather briefcase that probably cost more than her rent had been. He didn't see her at first. He was too busy talking to his lawyer, some polished guy in glasses who smiled without warmth. Eleanor sat on the bench, clutching a manila folder filled with originals. David's letter, the insurance forms, the title, the will. Her hands were cold even though it was warm inside. Mark stood next to her, one hand on Ranger's leash, the other holding a to-go coffee. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Just being there made her feel like she wasn't walking into battle alone. Then Sarah Jenkins arrived. Blazer slightly wrinkled, hair tied back in a loose ponytail, and a look in her eyes that could cut steel. She dropped her briefcase on the floor with a quiet thud and sat beside Elena. "You ready for this?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I feel like if I breathe too loud, I'll mess it all up." Sarah smiled. "Then breathe loud and deep. That's how they'll know you belong here." Inside the courtroom, it didn't take long for the judge to get frustrated with Richard's lawyer. The man kept dancing around the original paperwork, insisting the documents had already been dealt with in a prior hearing. But Sarah had every receipt, every signature, every contradiction, laid out in chronological order like a surgeon exposing the truth, one careful cut at a time. Then it was Elena's turn to speak. She stood slowly, knees shaky, voice barely above a whisper at first. But the more she talked, the steadier she got. She told the truth, about losing David, about being vulnerable, about signing papers she didn't understand because she trusted someone she thought was family. She didn't cry, not until she looked at Leo, sitting quietly in the back, with Ranger's head resting on his lap. "My son still asks about his dad," she said, voice catching. "And I tell him the truth, that his dad was a good man, a strong man, and that even though he's gone, he left something behind. Honour. Integrity. That's what I'm fighting for." The judge sat back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. He didn't say anything right away. But Elena could feel something shifting in the room. Sarah leaned over and whispered, "You did it." Later, when the ruling came down, it wasn't flashy or dramatic. No loud gasps, no gavel slams like in the movies. Just words. Clear, firm. The court found in favour of Elena Albright. Richard was ordered to return the full amount of misappropriated funds, plus damages. The judge even added a note. "Let this serve as a reminder that trust is not a thing to be traded, it's a thing to be honoured." Eleanor's breath caught again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from release. She looked at Mark, and for the first time in years, she smiled without any weight behind it. And when she bent down to hug Leo, he whispered, "Daddy would be proud, huh?" She nodded. "He'd be proud of both of us." Ranger wagged his tail gently as if agreeing. And outside that small-town courthouse, for the first time in what felt like forever, the sun was shining. They didn't throw a party. There was no ribbon cutting, no big announcement, no cake with congratulations piped across the top. But when Eleanor stepped onto the porch of the small tan house with the blue door and the flickering porch light, something inside her shifted. It was theirs. Well, hers, but it felt like all three of them had earned it. Sarah had called in a few favours. Mark had rallied a handful of veterans from their old unit. A local church donated furniture. And one by one, things started falling into place. A used couch, a second-hand table, plates that didn't match but held food just the same. The house smelled like fresh paint and clean pine floors when Elena carried the last box in. Leo ran from room to room, shouting which one would be his and asking if they could put glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Ranger trotted behind him, tail wagging, ears perked, like he'd just accepted a new mission to guard this house, this family. Mark stood in the front yard, arms crossed, watching it all like he didn't want to blink and miss a second of it. "You're really not coming in?" Eleanor asked from the doorway, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. He shrugged. "Just wanted to make sure you were settled." "You built this with us," she said softly. "Come inside, Mark." So he did. They sat on the floor that night, no TV, no music, just takeout boxes and the sound of Leo humming while colouring at the kitchen counter. Eleanor looked around and exhaled, not the tired kind, the kind that meant maybe we're okay now. "You know what's crazy?" she said, breaking the silence. "I used to think the worst day of my life was when David died. But it wasn't. It was the day after, when I realised the world keeps moving. Bills keep coming, people stop calling, and you just have to figure it out with your heart cracked open." Mark nodded slowly. "Grief's a strange thing. It doesn't ask if you're ready, just shows up and takes a seat in your house. And stays longer than it should," she added. They both smiled at that. Ranger came over, pressing his head into her lap. She ran her fingers along his back. "He never left David," she whispered. "Not really." Mark looked at the dog, at Leo, at Elena, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not pride, something softer, quieter. Peace. Later that night, Leo curled up on his new bed with Ranger at his side. Eleanor tucked him in, brushing back a piece of hair from his forehead. "You're safe," she whispered. He was already asleep. Mark grabbed his coat, but Elena caught his arm. "You don't have to go." He paused. "I don't want to overstay." She shook her head. "We don't have enough good people in our lives to be setting them outside in the dark." So he stayed. Not forever, just one more night. But sometimes that's all someone needs, to know they're not rebuilding alone. Mornings came differently now. Not rushed, not filled with dread, just slow, steady light pouring through the curtains as the world outside took its time waking up. In that little house with the blue door, coffee brewed before alarms buzzed, and Leo laughed before cereal bowls hit the table. And Ranger? He settled in like he'd always lived there. He had a spot by the window, where the sun hit the floor just right. A rug that was technically Leo's, but had become his nap station. A water bowl with his name on it, hand-painted by Leo in uneven letters, with blue paw prints and a heart. Eleanor watched the two of them sometimes, her son and this quiet old dog, communicating in gestures and glances. Leo would read books out loud, and though Ranger didn't move much, he always stayed nearby, eyes half closed, tail tapping every few minutes like he was listening. One morning, Eleanor stood by the sink, staring out the window while drying a plate. Mark had come by early to fix a loose porch step. She could hear him out front, grumbling about bent nails and stubborn wood. It was a comfort, that sound. She looked down at Ranger lying by the sliding glass door. He lifted his head slightly, like he knew she was watching. "You found us," she whispered, "before we even knew we needed to be found." There was something about Ranger that wasn't just loyal, it was intentional. He didn't hover, he didn't beg for attention, he just showed up, sat quietly, stayed close. And somehow that was everything. Mark stepped inside a few minutes later, brushing dirt off his hands. "Front step's secure," he said. "No more tripping hazards." "Thank you," she said, smiling. "Want coffee?" "Always." They stood together in the kitchen while Leo played in the living room, building some kind of elaborate city out of couch cushions and shoeboxes. Elena turned to Mark, more thoughtful now. Do you ever think about why Ranger reacted the way he did that day? I mean, he saw a lot of people in need before, why us? Mark looked at the dog, who was now on his feet, tail swaying gently as Leo offered him a toy hammer for his cushion construction. I think he knew, Mark said, knew you were his mission. Elena tilted her head. Mission? Mark nodded. David and I used to talk about what comes after. Not heaven or anything that big, just what you leave behind. And Ranger, well, he was part of David, his loyalty, his discipline, his sense of what's right. He paused. I think when David died, Ranger didn't just lose a handler, he lost a purpose, until he found you. That hit deeper than Elena expected. She blinked fast, then looked away, swallowing emotion that came out of nowhere. Sometimes, she said softly, I feel like we didn't rescue him. He rescued us. Mark smiled, eyes gentle. That's the funny thing about dogs like him. They don't need words. They just show up when it counts. Outside, the breeze rattled the wind chimes someone had hung by the porch. Inside, life was quiet, but full. And Ranger? He was still watching, still guarding, still keeping the kind of promise that doesn't need to be spoken to be kept. It happened on a Sunday. Nothing dramatic, no big event, just a soft afternoon, the kind where time feels slower and everyone's a little quieter than usual. Mark had come by with groceries. He never said he was bringing them, but somehow there was always milk when they ran out, or soup when someone sneezed. Leo was in the backyard, chasing invisible dragons with a wooden sword. Elena was folding laundry on the couch, humming a tune she didn't even realise she remembered. Ranger was on the porch. He liked it there, the warm planks beneath him, the wind brushing through his fur, the sound of birds and leaves and distant laughter. Eleanor noticed first the stillness. She walked outside slowly, careful not to startle. But Ranger didn't lift his head. His breathing was soft, shallow, peaceful. She knelt beside him, laying a hand gently on his back. Hey, she whispered, like waking a sleeping friend. It's okay, we're home now. Mark stepped out moments later, sensing something had changed. And when he saw her, sitting beside Ranger, one hand resting over the dog's heart, tears slipping down her cheek but her face calm, he understood. Ranger had waited until the family was safe, until the child laughed again, until the woman smiled without fear, until the promise he'd carried in his bones was fully kept. He didn't need applause. He just needed peace. Later, Leo drew a picture, him and Ranger under a big tree, with a little heart floating above their heads. He pinned it on the fridge with a magnet that said, "Home is who you're with." Eleanor placed Ranger's collar in a shadow box next to David's folded flag. No words, just a photo of the two of them. David and Ranger, shoulder to shoulder, both younger, both stronger, both ready for anything. Mark helped mount it on the wall. He didn't say much, but before he left that night, he placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. You kept his memory alive, he said. And Ranger? He made sure of it. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the sleeve. I think they both did. Weeks passed, then months, and the little house with the blue door became more than a shelter. It became a home. Leo started school again. Elena found part-time work at a local vet's office. Ironic maybe, but comforting. Mark came around often, sometimes helping with repairs, sometimes just staying for dinner. And Ranger? He lived on, not in flesh or bark or footsteps on wood floors, but in the quiet safety that wrapped itself around them. In the way Leo always checked the front porch before bedtime. In the way Elena stopped looking over her shoulder. And in the way Mark finally let go of the guilt he didn't even know he was carrying. David's promise had never been just words. It had been action, loyalty, sacrifice, and love passed through pause and quiet gestures. So if you ever drive past a small house with a blue porch light and hear the sound of wind chimes on a still afternoon, stop and listen. Sometimes promises aren't shouted, they're kept in silence. This story really left a mark on me. It's not overly dramatic, but it touches on something deeply human: family, loyalty, and quiet acts of kindness. Sometimes, a small gesture can change someone's whole life, and I believe that each of us has our own Ranger. Something good out there, quietly guiding us forward. Hey, if you're still here listening, thank you so much. Every view, every share, every bit of support you give means the world and keeps me going. If this story touched something in you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to Rain Inside, and leave a comment below. I read every single one of them. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you again in the next video on Rain Inside. Wishing you a gentle, peaceful day.